What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today you're actually going to be able to hear me rant because we're going to be talking about the long-term athletic development model and all of its flaws. All right, so the LTAD, or long-term athletic development model, was created by a guy by the name of Istvan Balyi. It was in the late 90s, and in the early 2000s, it was adopted by pretty much every single major sports governing body, from USA Hockey to US Soccer and US Volleyball. I would assume like swimming and football and all those other sports as well, basketball. But I know for a fact USA Hockey did it because they kind of converted it into what's called the ADM, or the American Development Model. This model is characterized by different stages of training and then windows of opportunity within those stages of training. And it focuses on specifically how you're supposed to train athletes at any given time during those windows of opportunity, is what they call them, and stages of training. It starts from like the very first stage of training is 0 to 6, and it goes all the way into retirement. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the history of that model, what I believe its flaws are, and what you should probably be doing instead of putting your faith into a model that has zero long-term data to support its efficacy. All right, so who was the creator of this LTAD, or long-term athletic development model? His name was Istvan Balyi. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Could be butchering it. I've actually never heard anyone say it before, but I've read it a lot. He is the author of the book Long-Term Athletic Development. He, along with, I believe his name was Henderson, created this model back in the mid to late 90s, very early 2000s, and everybody kind of took it as gospel and ran with it, right? So he's taught this all over the world to various countries, like governing bodies for sport, and a lot of, at least in America, a lot of these governing bodies have taken it and created their own kind of models with it. For instance, you've got USA Hockey created what's called the American Athletic Development Model. No, sorry, the American Development Model, the ADM. Big thing for them, they preach it. It preaches a lot of great things, the overall athleticism, and athletic development. It teaches, what's it called? Like playing different sports, right? So becoming an athlete and not just a hockey player. So very few programs actually run in line with this. If you look at your local hockey rink, they've probably got way too much hockey offered over the summer when these kids should be playing other sports and learning how to be athletes, especially at 10U. Why there's a 10U summer hockey team is beyond me. It's so detrimental, and I'll do a podcast episode maybe in a couple weeks on sports specialization, how detrimental it is. But that's kind of beside the point. They've taken it and they've ran with it and kind of treated it like gospel. So Balyi's a very smart guy, right? He's very well educated. He's got a great track record. He's worked with 17 different Olympians. I'm not sure if they were all like medalists, but he's worked with some of the top athletes on the planet, right? But when they put this LTAD model together, they had zero long-term evidence that this worked. I'm not exactly positive on how they came up with the majority of this, but a lot of it is chronological age, a lot of it is emotional age, a lot of it is emotional maturity, I guess you could say, and a lot of it is growth development, right? So there are a lot of different windows of opportunity within these various stages that correlate with growth spurts for young ladies, menses, right? Because these are when all these hormonal changes are happening. So different things, it would make sense that different things would be pushed to the forefront because those adaptations will either be easier or harder to obtain, right? So that's basically the LTAD model. We're going to go over the various stages and the various windows of opportunity. And I'm going to give you my take on why I believe that, for one, it's been misinterpreted pretty seriously, and two, I don't necessarily agree with it as a whole. So before I get into the stages of training and the windows of opportunity, I want to talk about what kind of brought this up. So there's a study that's making the rounds again from back in 2010 that kind of had some criticisms of the LTAD model, and I'll kind of pull that up now. Kevin Neal, strength coach for the Boston Bruins, kind of posted this on, there's a hockey community Facebook page, and he kind of posted this and was asking people to kind of give their interpretations of it or what they thought of it, because a lot of us work with kids and a lot of people utilize this this long-term athletic development model. And, you had some various conversations start up about it. So this was back in 2010, right? And it's called the Long-Term Athlete Development Model, Physiological Evidence and Application. And what they found was that there's really no evidence to suggest that this model works or is right. And, I think rightfully so, because again, when it was instituted, we had no long-term evidence on it. It just kind of got implemented, and that was that. You're going to have some successes with a lot of kids because you are teaching athleticism here. Again, with the windows of opportunity, they've got their caveats with that. The stages of training are based on chronological age, when I believe they should kind of be based more on training age as opposed to chronological age, even though with some people they can kind of go hand in hand depending on when you started training. But if you're interested, it's about a 14-page article or study. And you can find it online anywhere. I'll link it in the description. Put a link to it up on the website so you guys can find it. But it's interesting, when we've been told over and over and over again that this is the way to train athletes, that there's no other way to train athletes. If you want to maximize athleticism, this is what we have to do. It's nice to see people kind of push back on that because, again, and I'll say this over and over again, there's no long-term evidence to suggest it works, and now we are 20 some odd years into this, and there's still no real long-term evidence that this works. All right, so now we're going to get into the stages of training and windows of opportunity. So we're going to start off with these stages of training here, right? And within these stages of training, there are 6 to 7 different ones if you include the quote-unquote active start. But there are 2 different models here, right? There's one for early specialization sports, and that's like gymnastics, diving, figure skating. And then there's a later specialization model here, and that is for combat sports like wrestling, team sports, hockey, football, baseball, basketball, things like that. Tennis could probably fall in either. I would personally want it to be in the late specialization model because we want to push as much stuff into that as possible. But with the way academies work and things like that, tennis is probably considered more of a quote-unquote early specialization sport. So within the early specialization model, we start off with what's called active start. Right? So active start is ages 0 to 6, and that's just running around, playing, having fun, playing tag, running around a jungle gym, like using the monkey bars, things like that. Kids just go out, figure out movement, and have fun. After that, we get into training to train. Following that, we are training to compete. Then we train to win. And then we have our training for life / retirement. Within the late specialization model, we start off with what's called fundamental, right? You'll notice that's a difference between the two. We start with the active start, and then we get into the FUN, capital FUN, demental, right? So this is a very big change between the early and late specialization models. As the late specialization models, kids are encouraged to have fun and kind of create love for the sport, right? So if you've played sports, you probably know it. As you get older, the sports kind of, as much fun as they are, they get less and less fun because more and more the game gets taken away from you, right? So you don't get to play the game you did when you played it out in your front yard. Now you're being told what to do. The game changes. It's a lot more structured. You have a role to fill, and it's just different. So kids are encouraged to just have fun playing the sport, learning the fundamentals, and not really working super structured, training. After that, they go training to train, then they go train to compete, then they go train to win, and then they go train for life / retirement. So this fundamentals, we'll start off with this one. We'll skip the early specialization model because it lacks that fundamental structured and fun time. And then we'll get into the rest of the thing because they kind of coincide and they are spitting images of each other after that, right? So we went over fundamental, and that's from ages 6 to 10 years old, right? Go out there, have fun, learn the game, learn how to have fun playing it, and figure it out, right? Not a ton of structured outside of, let's say basketball, for instance. This is how you dribble. This is how you shoot. You let kids get out there and figure it out, right? I think there's a ton of value in that. I think personally, there's entirely too much structured play when it comes to kids now, even at 8U and 10U, you got to let them figure it out. Following that, we have training to train, right? So this training to train is considered 75% training, 25% competition. For young boys, this is age 10 to 14, and for young girls, this is age 10 to 13. The reason for the variation there is hormone differences. For young boys, and if you've ever taught sports or played sports, you know, like right before boys go into puberty, there's this little window where girls absolutely dominate them, and that's why they're like training to train isn't kind of aligned with the boys. Like I said, 75% training, 25% competition. If you've ever been around the local 8U, 10U, 12U teams, you'll see that is way out of whack. Most teams are playing 75% of the time, and they are training 25% of the time. And this is because parents have been lied to and told that games are what make you better. I'll go to hockey just for an example here. In a hockey practice, right, let's use the goalie. How many pucks is a goalie going to see in a practice? 2, 3, 4, 500, right? How many pucks is a goalie going to see in a game? There's some games teams only muster up 15 to 20 shots. You know, regardless of your age group, you're going to see a lot more puck in practice. Same with players. How many times are you going to take a shot in a game? There are games where you may not get a shot on net. In practice, 30, 40, 50 times. You know, so this is very out of whack. And this is kind of beside the point here. It's kind of a little rant here. You know, that needs to be inverted. It should be 75% training, 25% competition. But, you know, it's more fun to post videos of your kid scoring a goal in a game on Instagram than it is in practice. So this is what we're left with. Following that stage, we have what's called training to compete. Right, and this is where it becomes more 50-50. 50% training, 50% competition. And for young boys, this is like 14 to 18. And for young girls, this is 13 to 17. All right, there's a marked shift in the training to competition ratio because, you know, kids now have to learn to compete, right, which is what this is called, training to compete. They have to learn to kind of find that other gear and perform. They've spent all this time training. Right now, we start to get to a little bit more of the fun part for most kids, and that's performing and competing, and that's half of the time. Training is the other half of the time. Following that, we have training to win, right? And that is 18 plus for males, and that is 17 plus for females. And this is when like maybe 25% of your time is spent in training, and maybe 75% is spent in competition. We're talking about like university, pro, junior hockey, you know, 18, 20U. This is when things change, right? You should have developed your skill set already, and now it is time to compete and play. The very last stage is the retirement or training for life, and this is just developing habits that you can carry with you for the rest of your life. You can play beer league if it's hockey. You can play slow pitch softball if you're a former baseball player. You can go out and run marathons, whatever it is. You are just training for longevity. So those are the stages. And again, like I mostly agree with those stages. Young kids should get out there and figure it out and learn how to have fun. You know, you should be training the majority of the time before you're like 13, 14 years old. Then you should kind of have a good balance of training and playing by the time you're in your mid-teens, early to mid-teens. And then after you're 18 plus, like everything is about competition. Even your training is geared towards competition. We lose that overall athleticism development because now you have to compete. We have to make you better, right, at your given task that you have to accomplish on the field of play. So those are the stages of development, right? So fundamental, that is let's go all the way back. Active start, 0 to 6, go have fun on the playground. Fundamentals, 6 to 10, learn the sport, figure it out, have fun. Training to train, that's 10 to 14 for boys, 10 to 13 for girls. Start learning to compete a little bit, right? But you're mostly training. It's 75% training, and that's in the gym, that's off the field, that's on the field, that's sport like skill set development. That is athleticism skill set development. It all goes into that 75%. Then you train to compete, 14 to 18 for young boys, 13 to 17 for young girls. And that's where you're truly learning how to compete, right? Your 50-50 competition to training stimulus. Following that, you train to win, right? 18 plus for males, 17 plus for females. And then we retire, right? So you're just trying to increase your overall health and make sure that you're not going to need a total knee replacement by the time you're 40 from playing the sport that you love. All right, next we're going to get into the windows of development, and I'm not going to break that down quite as much, and I'll tell you why when we get there. All right, so now we're going to get into the part where I really kind of have beef with the LTAD model and its interpretation from various coaches, even Balyi himself, and that's the windows of trainability or windows of opportunity. They're often called both, either, whatever, that's what they are. So I'm not going to go into quite as much detail or show you graphs or anything because they're very convoluted, and listening to this, if you're not watching it, you would be bored to tears and you wouldn't understand any of it anyways. So what I will say is these windows of trainability are based off of various growth spurts. All right. And with young women, when they first get their period, right, their menses, because these are the times when hormones change. So it has a markedly change on the way that you're going to adapt to certain things. So Balyi decided because this is happening, then we should train for this adaptation, which I don't think is necessarily a wrong thought process. But I would probably do it a little bit differently, and I do it a little bit differently with most of my athletes because it is almost impossible to try to time training based on somebody's growth spurts, and when they have these hormonal changes associated with menses and puberty. So the different blocks, right, and both males and females have these blocks. They occur at different times. And again, a lot of that is because of just hormone changes. Boys, those hormone changes don't happen until later. There's a time from 8 to 13 years old where young girls have more testosterone than young boys by a good amount. And that's when you see 12U, these young ladies, and even 14U sometimes. It usually tapers off after that. 10U, where these young ladies are absolutely dominating these young boys. And that's because physiologically they're more primed to do so. So if they are training well, and they are genetically predisposed to be pretty athletic, they're going to dominate sports, and you see it all the time. So these windows, and one more thing here, they're based on a little bit chronological age, right? A little bit of these growth spurts and hormonal changes, and a little bit of emotional and developmental age, right? So one of the reasons why young ladies have their train to compete a little bit earlier than boys outside of the the whole hormones thing is because and if you've been around young girls, this, they're a lot more emotionally developed than young boys are, and testosterone will do some funky things to you as a young boy. So they're based off those things as well. All right, so the windows are, we have a speed window, we have a suppleness window, we have a skills window, a second speed window, a stamina window, a strength window, and then for young ladies, we have a strength 1 and strength 2 window, right? Boys only have the one, young ladies have the second one. And again, these are all based on hormonal changes within the body, because they are going to have an effect on all these things. Now, what is commonly thought is that you should only change for these adaptations within these windows, right? That is what every coach that I've ever talked to believes. So every sport coach that I've ever talked to believes, and that's how they do things, right? So, window 1, when these kids are real young, we teach speed, and we teach simultaneously because these windows kind of overlap with each other, suppleness, which is mobility, flexibility, that whole thing. Right. And then, they've got this window where they can develop a skill set. Right. So maybe outside of the field of play, we teach, sprint technique, jumping technique, landing, all that kind of stuff, because movement skills are skills and the brain's very plastic at this point. So if we can teach them to do these things, maybe they hold on to them forever. Right. Then during the speed 2 window, I've heard coaches say, well, this is when we work on lateral movement. The stamina window, which this is an absolute joke in my opinion, and I'll go over why in a minute here, as if to think that you should only work on quote-unquote stamina at one single part of your life, and that's going to carry with you everywhere forever. The stamina, cardiovascular adaptations, are some of the easiest to obtain. They're pretty fickle. They leave pretty quick, but they're some of the easiest to attain and maintain. And then, strength, a strength window, I don't know. I don't agree with a lot of this. So here are my issues with the long-term athletic development model. First, before we start, I'm going to say this again. There's zero long-term data to suggest that this is the way to do things. None. There's still none. It is 2023. This whole thing is 25, 30 years old, and there still is no data to support it. Nobody's run those studies. And I believe because A, it would be a nightmare to run those studies, but B, everybody's pretty content with the way things are right now. Why rock the boat? We've got like a blueprint as to how to train, like, let's just use it. Nobody's getting hurt. Everybody's doing okay. So good, right? But again, no long-term data. These governing bodies just took it, treated it like gospel, and said, here, coaches, this is how you coach your kids, right? So big thing here for me, I believe this has been misinterpreted in a major way, right? So these training windows are not like windows, the trainability windows or windows of opportunity are when these adaptations come the easiest, right? So if speed comes the easiest to somebody, why on earth am I going to spend all of my time on speed, right? That's the easiest one. I should probably devote 15, 20% of my time to those and work on, the other adaptations at the same time, right? I'm not going to take a full 2 years of this kid's life and say, all right, just mobility and just speed. But sadly, that's how a lot of these coaches kind of function. They think, oh, strength, not a big deal. And that's why you have these kids on agility ladders and doing sprints and all that kind of shit. And it doesn't really, like, it doesn't, like, compute, right? They're not going to get as athletic as they could because they're learning how to get stronger, like, is going to be delayed by, man, if you don't have a kid like strength training by the time they're 10 and they wait till that strength window, they're not going to touch a weight until they're 16, 17, 18 years old. And that's going to put them way behind the eight ball as far as like possibly getting hurt, like creating that tissue resiliency and like just putting more force in the ground, becoming more athletic, stronger, faster, bigger, all those things. So, I think that's a very big misconception, right? That these windows that's when we focus on those things. No, I believe when you should not focus on those things because those adaptations are the easiest to get. So we should spend some time on them. Don't get me wrong, right? But we shouldn't spend the majority of our time on that because less effort will kind of get us more, right? Another issue I have, right? The speed windows. So when you think of speed, what do you think of, right? Probably sprinting. That's everybody's thought process, right? I want to sprint. I want to get faster. What do? I sprint. So that's what coaches do. You see, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. And then again at like 13, 14, 15. It is sprint training because, this is the speed window. This is what we have to do. But it doesn't say sprint speed. It says speed. What that means is speed of movement, right? So that can include loaded jumps, med ball work, very light, like Olympic, and not at like 7, 8, 9, but very light Olympic and landmine variations. What else? Sprinting is obviously part of that, right? But it's speed of movement. It's not sprint speed. It is speed, right? So try not to get, if you are going to follow this model, so dialed into speed, it has to be sprint speed. We got to get faster that way because you're really going to miss the boat. You could teach these kids how to jump. You could teach these kids how to sprint. You could teach them to throw med balls. Anything that's going to be faster, right? If you believe in this model within that window is going to be beneficial. So you'd be better off incorporating all of these things if you want to increase overall athleticism long-term for your athlete, right? As far as like the windows go, I will say one more thing. You can't like break down training in that way, right? So we've done some studies now and we found that concurrent training, right? Or like a conjugate's not the right word at that age, but a concurrent training model is going to be incredibly beneficial to the athlete. You can have high days, low days, you can have speed days, you can have strength days, you can have at most ages, like hypertrophy and growth isn't going to happen. So you want to save that till maybe they're 14, 15, 16, 17, that's when, hormones are going to be right for that kind of thing. But speed, power, mobility, suppleness, elasticity, all that stuff, that can be trained all the time. We can start when they're 6, right? And then we can continue that when they're in their 20s and 30s. So, don't get so boxed into these windows, right? They don't mean what you think they mean. They mean that those adaptations are the easiest to obtain during that time. So you should spend less time on those things and put some other things to the forefront so that we can develop the most well-rounded athlete that we can. And that's my rant on the windows of trainability. So there you have it. That's my take on the LTAD model. I think it gets misinterpreted. I think that there's not enough evidence to back it up, and I'm not alone. I think if you're trying to like have longevity in athletics and increase overall athleticism to the highest degree that you can, I think a different approach is necessary. We should focus on strength training a little bit early. Now, that doesn't mean that we're 1 rep max is at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. No, but it means getting them under some challenging loads so that they can increase their overall strength, because we know most strength adaptations are not size gains, right? They are central nervous system adaptations gains. And if we can get them stronger at a young age, by the time like it's time for them to grow, right, and shift their training so that we can put some size on them, dude, they're going to be able to hit the ground running. A kid who can deadlift 300 pounds at 14 is going to develop a hell of a lot more size than a kid who is just learning how to deadlift at that same time. So, strength needs to be part of the equation the entire time. Speed of movement needs to be part of the equation the entire time. And I'm not talking about like just sprints. Again, to go back to what I said earlier, speed of movement, right? So med ball work, even some very lightly loaded jumps, some overspeed eccentric work with the jumps, depth drop jumps. Hell, I've got kids in my middle school group where we have progressed to the point now where they're doing depth drop jumps off like 24, 30-inch boxes, and they're able to get height, right? These kids also are deadlifting, 275, 300 pounds in a good position, but like that is going to be much more beneficial to the kid than I said, hey, line up on the line. We're going to do 10 sprints for 10 yards today, and that's going to be our training, right? Mobility is something we can always work on. Increasing strength at those end ranges of motion is going to be huge. That's how we increase mobility, and that's how we increase our flexibility. So suppleness isn't going to be this thing that just needs to be worked on when we're 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, at that point in time, I will say for that window, it may not be the worst idea to start incorporating that mobility work, even though these kids aren't going to pay attention to it or want to do it, because you can't set the table for later on, right? So if we can increase some of the movement in that joint at a young age, hopefully they're able to hold on to that. Whereas if you get somebody who gets very stiff at that age, it is like pulling teeth to increase their mobility over time, right? Stamina is something that they can work on all the time. I think conditioning is the dumbest part of what I do, because your sport should take care of that for the most part. My job is to get you prepared for practice. Practice prepares you for games. So if you're spending a lot of time in the stamina window running miles and sprints and stuff like that, I think you're absolutely wasting your time. You're wasting that athlete's time. And if you're in the private sector, you're absolutely wasting their money, because there are other things that we need to develop outside of that, right? The skill, right? Skills are something that you should try to teach at a young age. So to say that we need to focus on speed when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? I think that's very short-sighted, because if we can teach them positioning within that speed, or we can teach them positioning within that jump, with their brains being that plastic, they'll be able to carry that forever. So when you hand them off to their, college strength and conditioning coach or pro strength and conditioning coach, that coach is going to be like, wow, I don't have to do anything now because you've done it for me. All I have to do is deal with the variability of adaptation within their program, because you've taught them so well and they've been able to hold on to that. That will also keep them from getting injured at young ages and older ages. All of that. So work on these things, these speed, suppleness, stamina, strength, all S's, I guess. I just kind of noticed that. Skills and speed, like work on all of them all the time, because they can adapt to those things all of the time. And I think if you are trying to create the most athletic version of a kid that you cannot break training up into windows, because one window, like your speed one window, is not going to carry into your stamina and strength window, right? So work on these things all the time, and you'll be able to carry them with you all the time. So to summarize this up, windows of trainability are dumb. I think the stages of training are better off being like training age as opposed to chronological age, right? I think that the chronological age gives you some like emotional maturity stuff, but I think the training age is much more important. And even if you get a kid when he's 14, he still needs, like, for the first time training ever, he still needs to he's probably past the fundamentals at this point, but like training to train, right? Kind of learning how to train needs to be the stage that they're in. They'll come out of it faster than like a 7-year-old would, but they still need to hit that spot so that they can learn the basics and move on to the like training to compete and training to win and all that. So I think that's it. Balyi, smart guy. LTAD, I think, is a poor model as far as trainability and athleticism go. Windows of opportunity, I think, are misinterpreted to the point of like making athletes training worse. And that's that. So if you have any questions, like, you can go on the website, the Lions Den Sports Performance, right? dldsp.com. Drop me an email. I think my email is up on here on YouTube and probably within Spotify, Apple, all that within the description as well. If you have questions, just reach out to me. I'm an open book. I had a guy reach out to me the other day about some West Side stuff for his high school athletes, and dude, I love talking shop. I'm helping a guy who's in Iowa right now, right? So not too far away for help. Hopefully you guys have a good rest of your week, and I'll see you next week where we hopefully talk about something else very fun.